There's a specific kind of silence that fills a house in Charlotte when everyone else is asleep and the streetlights are just starting to reflect off the wet pavement outside. For a man my age, 72 years old, that silence is usually a comfort, a rare moment of peace before the world demands your attention. But there is one room in the house where that silence can suddenly feel very heavy and very dangerous. It is a room we enter multiple times a day, a place where we lock the door, expect absolute privacy, and completely drop our guard. We do not think of it as a hazardous environment. We think of it as just another part of the daily routine. But I can tell you from hard experience and from watching good men lose their lives that the small, quiet space of your own bathroom is the site of more sudden, catastrophic medical emergencies than almost anywhere else in your home. When you are standing there in the middle of the night, looking at your own reflection in the mirror, you are often closer to the edge of an emergency room visit than you could ever imagine. Today I am going to talk to you about something that older men simply do not talk about. We are going to discuss a 30-second window of time that occurs every single day. A brief moment where you are likely making a mechanical mistake that forces your heart to the absolute brink of failure. We are going to talk about a hidden spike in blood pressure so violent and so sudden that it can dislodge plaque, rupture vessels, and trigger a massive heart attack before you even have the chance to reach for the door handle. And I am going to walk you through the exact physical adjustment I make every single day, a completely free 30-second correction in how I use my own body that removed this invisible threat from my life. I am not talking about a new medication or a complicated diet plan. I am talking about the mechanical reality of human plumbing, the dangerous way we are conditioned to handle physical strain, and the simple shift in your breathing that can literally keep you out of the back of an ambulance. When you are raised the way I was, born down in Columbia, South Carolina in the 1950s, you learn very early that certain topics are entirely off limits. You do not talk about digestion. You do not talk about your bowel habits, and you certainly do not talk about struggling in the bathroom. It is considered undignified. It is considered a weakness. You are taught that a man handles his private business quickly, quietly, and without complaint. I carried that stoic silence with me through decades of working in the public transit system here in Charlotte. I spent years working my way up from the maintenance yards to the supervisor desk. My entire life was built around tight schedules, high stress, and ignoring my own physical discomfort to get the job done. I ate heavy, fast food on the go. I did not drink nearly enough water, and as a result, my internal system was constantly sluggish, constantly struggling. But I never mentioned it to anyone. I thought that pushing through physical resistance, even behind a locked bathroom door, was just a normal part of getting older. But the truth I had to learn the hard way is that pressure rarely rises alone. It rises with the habits we ignore. For years, I treated my time in the bathroom like an annoying chore that just needed to be forced out of the way. I would sit down, tense every muscle in my core, hold my breath, and push with everything I had. Sometimes it would take 20 or 30 seconds of intense, red-faced straining. I would feel a massive pressure building in my head, a throbbing behind my eyes, and a tight, uncomfortable squeezing in my chest. When I finally released my breath, I would often feel dizzy, lightheaded, and sometimes I would even see small black spots dancing in my vision. I normalized this completely. I told myself it was just a tough morning. I told myself it was because of the fried food I had for dinner the night before. I never once considered that the dizziness I was feeling was the direct result of my heart being temporarily starved of oxygen. Control begins with what you stop normalizing. And I had normalized the feeling of intentionally suffocating my own cardiovascular system just to finish a basic bodily function. The realization of how dangerous this was did not come to me in a doctor's office. It came to me on a humid Tuesday afternoon at the main transit terminal. There was a driver I had known for 15 years, a man named Robert. Robert was a big guy, a steady worker, the kind of man who never called out sick and never complained about the long routes. One afternoon, between shifts, Robert went into the employee restroom. 20 minutes passed and his bus was scheduled to pull out. Another driver went in to check on him. They found Robert collapsed on the floor, completely unresponsive. By the time the paramedics arrived and got the stretcher through those narrow doors, it was too late. It was a massive, sudden heart attack. The shock that rippled through the terminal was profound. Everyone kept saying how sudden it was, how he had just been laughing in the break room 10 minutes earlier. But as I watched the ambulance pull away, carrying a man who had simply walked into a bathroom and never walked out, a cold, heavy fear settled into my stomach. I knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever happened to Robert in that small private room was exactly what I had been risking every single morning. A few weeks after Robert's funeral, I had a scheduled checkup with my cardiologist. I was sitting on that examination table, feeling the paper crinkle underneath me, listening to the hum of the air conditioner. My blood pressure numbers were already a concern, sitting constantly in the danger zone. The doctor was adjusting my medication and giving me the standard lecture about sodium and exercise. But then I remembered Robert, and despite my pride, despite decades of Southern conditioning that told me to keep my mouth shut about private matters, I forced myself to ask the question. I described my morning routine. I described the straining, the holding of the breath, the pressure in my head, and the dizziness that followed. The doctor stopped writing in my chart. He put his pen down, looked at me with absolute seriousness, and told me that I was actively playing Russian roulette with my life. He told me that what I thought was just a difficult trip to the bathroom was actually a violent mechanical assault on my heart. My daughter Danielle, who works alongside nutritionists and understands the clinical mechanics of the body, sat down with me later that week at my kitchen table and explained the exact science of what the doctor had warned me about. She explained the physiological process called the Valsalva maneuver. It sounds like a complicated medical term, but it is exactly what you do when you bear down and hold your breath to force a bowel movement. When you take a deep breath, close your airway, and push hard, you are massively increasing the pressure inside your chest cavity. That immense pressure completely compresses the major veins that carry blood back to your heart. For those 10, 20, or 30 seconds while you are straining, the blood flow to your heart drops drastically. Your heart is still pumping, but it is pumping empty. Then, the moment you finally exhale and release the strain, all that trapped blood comes rushing back into the heart at once, causing a massive, violent spike in your blood pressure. Think about it like the air brake system on one of the heavy city buses I used to manage. The system relies on a steady, controlled flow of pressurized air to keep the brakes functioning safely. If you manually block the return valve and force the compressor to keep running, the pressure inside those lines builds to a critical, explosive level. The hoses stretch, the seals groan, and the metal fittings are pushed to their absolute breaking point. When you suddenly release that blockage, the violent surge of pressure can blow the entire system apart. Your cardiovascular system operates on the exact same principles. Your arteries are the airlines. When you hold your breath and bear down with all your strength, you are clamping the return valve. You are forcing your heart to work against a massive wall of pressure. And if your arteries are already stiffened by age or narrowed by cholesterol, that sudden spike in pressure when you finally exhale is enough to dislodge a piece of plaque, send it straight to your brain, and cause an immediate stroke. That is what happens in those small, quiet bathrooms. It is a mechanical failure caused by a 30-second operational mistake. When Danielle explained that to me, I felt a deep, profound sense of shame, followed immediately by clarity. I realized that my refusal to understand the basic mechanics of my own body, my insistence on forcing things through sheer willpower, was not strength at all. It was ignorance. I looked at my son Marcus, who works in insurance and understands the statistics of sudden mortality better than anyone. Marcus had told me time and time again that the biggest risks to men our age are not exotic diseases, but the daily, mundane choices we make when no one is watching. I realized that if I did not change this deeply ingrained habit, my wife Gloria was going to be the one finding me on a bathroom floor, just like Robert. I was not going to let my stubbornness become her trauma. I had to fundamentally change the way I handled the most private moments of my day. The fix, the practical action I took to eliminate this massive risk, required zero money and zero medical equipment. It required a complete dismantling of my pride and a deliberate, conscious retraining of a habit I had held for over 60 years. I had to learn how to operate the machinery of my body without causing an explosion. The protocol I developed, which I now follow with absolute non-negotiable consistency, starts before I even enter the bathroom. It begins with the realization that you cannot force the body to do what it is not ready to do. If I sit down and feel resistance, I do not engage in a battle of wills. I do not hold my breath and prepare to strain. If it is not ready, I stand up, I wash my hands, and I walk away. I will try again later. The idea that you have to finish the job immediately, regardless of the physical cost, is a dangerous illusion. But when the time comes and I do need to exert some level of physical effort, I use a specific breathing technique that completely neutralizes the danger of the Valsalva maneuver. It is a 30-second mechanical correction that protects the heart. When I feel the need to push, I never, under any circumstances, hold my breath. Instead, I take a normal breath in, and as I bear down, I purse my lips together tightly, almost like I am trying to whistle or blow out a stubborn candle, and I forcefully exhale the air through that small opening. I push the air out continuously for the entire duration of the physical strain. By forcing the air out through pursed lips, I am keeping the airway open. I am preventing the massive, catastrophic buildup of pressure inside the chest cavity. The blood continues to flow back to the heart. The massive spike in blood pressure is completely bypassed. It feels unnatural at first. It feels strange to make a hissing sound in the quiet of the bathroom, but that simple, continuous exhalation is the release valve that keeps the internal engine from blowing a gasket. Along with the breathing technique, Gloria and I had to make a fundamental change to the fuel we were putting into the system. You cannot fix a plumbing issue just by changing how you push the water. You have to change what is going through the pipes. I had to admit that my lifelong habit of eating heavy, processed meats and ignoring fiber was creating the very blockages I was straining against. Gloria, who is the absolute anchor of consistency in our home, started making sure that every single dinner included a massive portion of soluble fiber. We brought in the dark leafy greens, the beans, the whole grains, and I started drinking water the way I used to drink black coffee. I keep a large glass of water on my nightstand, and before my feet even touch the floor in the morning, I drink the entire thing. The hydration and the fiber work together to make the internal transit system operate smoothly, eliminating the need for that dangerous, violent straining in the first place. It took weeks of conscious, deliberate effort to break the old habit. There were mornings when I would sit down, feel the resistance, and immediately take a deep breath and clamp my airway shut out of pure instinct. But then I would remember the terminal. I would remember the ambulance lights reflecting off the brick walls. I would remember the look on the doctor's face when he told me I was playing Russian roulette. And I would stop. I would release the breath, purse my lips, and blow the air out. The heart pays attention to what we repeat every day. It does not care about your excuses or your pride. It only cares about the physical reality of the pressure you put it under. Gradually, the new breathing technique became my natural reflex. The dizzy spells I used to experience after leaving the bathroom completely disappeared. The pounding pressure in my head vanished. I realized that for decades, I had been artificially inducing a state of cardiac distress every single morning, and I had simply learned to live with the aftermath. 6 months later, during a follow-up visit, I sat in the cardiologist's office again. He checked my chart, noted the stabilization in my resting blood pressure, and asked how I was feeling. I looked him in the eye and told him I had taken his warning seriously. I told him I had stopped treating my body like a heavy piece of machinery that could just be forced into submission. He nodded slowly and told me that the simple behavioral change I had made, the decision to stop the massive daily spikes in pressure caused by the Valsalva maneuver, was doing more to protect me from a sudden stroke than doubling my medication ever could. They often focus on the pharmaceutical interventions because that is what they are trained to do. But they know, and I know, that the daily mechanical choices we make in private dictate our survival. You do not want your first real warning to be an emergency room visit. I took my warning, and I changed the fundamental way I operate. I am not sharing this story because I enjoy talking about the mechanics of the bathroom. Believe me, a man of my generation would rather talk about almost anything else. I am sharing this because I know exactly how many men my age are walking into that small room every single day, locking the door, and unknowingly putting a massive, deadly strain on a heart that is already working as hard as it can. I know how comforting it is to believe that because a habit is private, it is not dangerous. We wrap our pride around our physical struggles, and we suffer in silence, believing that asking for help or admitting a vulnerability is a failure. But true failure is leaving your wife to answer the door for the paramedics because you were too stubborn to change a 30-second habit. True failure is robbing your grandchildren of your presence because you refuse to understand the basic mechanics of your own cardiovascular system. I still have mornings where the whole instincts flare up, where the desire to rush, to force the issue, and move on with my day tries to take over. I am human, and decades of conditioning do not erase themselves completely. But then I look at the framed photos of my family in the hallway. I think about Marcus and the relief in his voice when he knows I am actively managing my risks. I think about Danielle and the knowledge she armed me with, and I slow down. I take the time my body requires. I purse my lips, I exhale the air, and I protect the engine. The transformation is never perfect, and I know I cannot outsmart time forever. But I am in control of the things I can control. I am still here, living my life in Charlotte, watching the sun come up over the trees. I am still learning, still adjusting, still treating this body with the respect it has earned. And tomorrow morning, when I wake up to the quiet of the house, I will practice the exact same 30-second discipline again, because peace of mind for myself and for the people who love me is built one careful breath at a time.